Today, on Guess What I Found Out, a mountain sat quietly for 200 years, and then made the loudest sound a human being has ever survived hearing. Some didn't survive it. Their eardrums did not get a vote. Last time, Curious George, we watched scientists carefully build something small and needy from raw chemicals in a lab, one controlled step at a time. Today, we're doing the opposite. We're watching something enormous get torn apart with zero human control whatsoever, and somehow leave behind more hard data than almost any disaster before it. Subscribe now, because unlike this volcano, I actually want you to stick around after a long, ominous silence. The island was called Krakatoa, sitting in the Sunda Strait between Java and Sumatra, right where two tectonic plates grind against each other about as violently as anywhere on the planet. For 2 centuries, it had gone quiet. Jungle grew back. Monkeys moved in. Ships sailed past a peaceful green mountain and thought nothing of it. It was a quiet neighbour until the morning it turned out to be the loudest thing that has ever happened. Here's the problem with volcanic silence. It isn't the same as safety. A thick gas-choked plug of magma doesn't relax during quiet decades. It reloads, pressure building behind rock that has no easy path out. 200 years of that with nowhere to go, sitting directly on top of the crater left by an earlier eruption. I want to flag something here, because a popular version of this story claims that earlier crater came from a catastrophic eruption around the year 535, one supposedly big enough to dim the sun worldwide for over a year. It's a great story, but it also appears to be false. Drilling projects in the strait have turned up no geological evidence that any eruption happened there at that time. The quiet neighbour's later behaviour needed no help from a fabricated backstory. By May of 1883, the mountains started coughing, ash columns, minor blasts, pumice floating through shipping lanes. A colonial steamship actually ran sightseeing cruises around the smoking island for 25 guilders a ticket. People watched a volcano audition for disaster for 3 straight months and kept booking tickets, because when a threat performs without ever following through, your brain quietly downgrades it to entertainment. A Dutch engineer who surveyed the stripped ash-buried island in August recommended no further landings, then still predicted it would settle back into silence. He wasn't foolish. The instruments and vocabulary to describe what was actually happening underneath him simply didn't exist yet. They didn't have long to wait to find out how wrong that prediction was. On August 27th, the quiet neighbour stopped being quiet forever. 4 explosions tore through the morning. At 10:02 a.m., the largest of them hollowed out the magma chamber so completely that the ground above it had nothing left to hold it up. 3 volcanic peaks collapsed into the sea in minutes. Billions of gallons of ocean water poured directly onto exposed magma, burning at roughly 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit. That water didn't boil. It vaporized instantly, expanding inside a structure that was simultaneously failing beneath it. The best available estimates put the energy released at somewhere around 200 megatons, several times larger than the biggest nuclear weapon ever tested. Those are modelled estimates from a pre-instrumental era, not a direct measurement, so treat the exact number with some healthy skepticism. But the scale, whatever the precise figure, was absurd. Now for the part that made this story famous. Sound travels as pressure waves, and the decibel scale is logarithmic, meaning every 10 units represents 10 times the energy, not just a little more noise. At Batavia, 160 kilometers away, an actual physical instrument, a gasometer, recorded a pressure spike so severe it blew the recording needle clean off its scale, corresponding to somewhere around 172 to 180 decibels of measured sound. That part is solid, documented data. You'll also see the figure 310 decibels attached to this event constantly, describing the sound right at the source. Be a little careful with that number, Curious George. It's a backward extrapolation from the measured distant readings, and most physicists will tell you a sound that loud stops behaving like sound entirely. There's a hard ceiling around 194 decibels in our atmosphere, past which the low pressure point of the wave would require negative air pressure, which is physically impossible. Past that ceiling, you're not listening to a sound anymore. You're getting hit by a wall of moving air. Sailors on a ship 60 kilometers away had their eardrums ruptured permanently by that wall. People 4,800 kilometers away, roughly the distance from New York to London, heard it clearly enough to send out search parties for a ship in distress. There was no ship. So, which detail here messes with your head more? The sound, loud enough to be mistaken for cannon fire nearly 5,000 kilometers away, or the sailors who lost their hearing before they even had time to react? Tell me in the comments, and don't just pick the easy one. Most of the death toll didn't come from the sound, or even the explosion. It came from tsunamis and scorching ground-hugging clouds of gas and ash called pyroclastic flows. At one village, a wave reportedly climbed 46 meters above sea level. That same steamship that had been running 25 Gilder sightseeing cruises 2 months earlier survived the wave by turning to face it head-on. Its crew watched an entire town simply cease to exist from the deck. A pyroclastic flow crossed 40 kilometers of open ocean without slowing down, because as its heaviest material sank into the water, it flash-boiled a cushion of steam underneath itself, letting the rest of the cloud ride across the surface almost frictionlessly. It reached a village on the far coast and ignited wood on contact. The official death toll, recorded by Dutch colonial authorities at the time, was 36,417. More recent historical review suggests the real number could be considerably higher, since coastal Sumatran communities were undercounted. Here's where this story turns from disaster movie into a kind of ancient scientific accident. Barographs, instruments quietly recording air pressure for ordinary weather purposes, picked up the pressure wave at stations across the entire globe. The Royal Society later compiled these readings from more than 50 stations and found the wave had passed by roughly 7 times over 5 days, working out to about 3.5 full trips around the planet. Nobody had built these instruments to study something like this. The event itself forced an entirely new kind of atmospheric science into existence, almost by accident. There's a strange, quiet postscript to all of this. The ash that reached the stratosphere stayed there for years, scattering sunlight into unusually vivid red sunsets across Europe and North America. In 1892, a Norwegian painter named Edvard Munch was walking near Oslo when the sky turned a color he couldn't explain. He wrote about the feeling it gave him. He painted it the following year. That painting is called The Scream. And the widely accepted leading theory among atmospheric scientists is that its blood-red sky is a genuine observational record of volcanic haze, drifting overhead nearly a decade after an island half a world away tore itself apart. So here's the actual takeaway. A single geological event that lasted a matter of hours ended up rewriting global temperatures, inspiring one of the most recognizable paintings in modern art, and inventing an entire scientific field almost as a side effect. The mountain that produced it is still there. A new cone rose out of the collapsed caldera in the 1920s, broke the ocean's surface for good in 1930, and in December 2018, a chunk of it collapsed into the sea and triggered a tsunami that killed hundreds more people, with essentially no warning beforehand. The quiet neighbor moved back in, and it still hasn't fully settled down. Some silences really are just reloading. Hit like, hit subscribe, and I'll see you next time something ancient decides to remind us it was never actually finished. See you there, Curious George.